The sun was shining the morning I buried my husband, and somehow that made it hurt even more. The world had no right to look so alive while Qasim's name was being lowered into the earth. Birds sang from the cemetery trees. Cars passed beyond the iron gates, and somewhere in the distance, people were laughing like my entire life had not just been split in half. I stood beside his grave in a black dress that still smelled faintly of the hospital waiting room, holding our 2-year-old son, Rayyan, against my chest while he slept through the final goodbye. He was too young to understand, and then my mother called it a trivial event. Before this story continues, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the kind of love that still matters even after someone is gone. My name is Safina Armour, and for most of my life, I believed family meant forgiveness. I believed blood deserved endless chances, even when it cut you deeper than strangers ever could. My parents, Haris and Maheen, had never truly accepted Qasim. They thought he was too quiet, too ordinary, too far beneath the polished life they imagined for me. Qasim was a paramedic, the kind of man who came home exhausted, but still washed bottles, folded tiny socks, and kissed my forehead before asking if I had eaten. He did not own fancy watches or speak loudly at family dinners, but he had a heart that made people feel safe. To my parents, that was never enough. The accident happened on a bright Wednesday morning. Qasim was driving back from an overnight shift when a truck ran a red light. The call came while I was feeding Rayyan breakfast. One moment, I was wiping banana from his chin, and the next, a stranger was telling me to come quickly. By noon, I was sitting in a hospital corridor with Qasim's wedding ring in my palm, listening to a doctor speak in a voice too gentle for the words he was saying. Qasim was gone before I could say goodbye. Gone before I could tell him I forgave him for leaving his shoes in the hallway. Gone before I could tell him Rayyan had finally said a full sentence that morning. Gone before I could remind him that he was my home. I called my parents because that is what daughters do when their world collapses. My mother answered on the third ring, sounding distracted. I told her Qasim was dead, and silence stretched between us. Not grief, not shock, just a pause, as if she were deciding how inconvenient this was going to be. She said she was sorry in the same tone someone uses when rain ruins a picnic. My father came on the phone and asked when the burial would be. I told him the next day, before noon, because Qasim's family wanted to follow tradition. He sighed and said they had a charity luncheon that had been planned for weeks. I thought I had misheard him. I told him his son-in-law was being buried. I told him his grandson had lost his father. My father said they would try to come, but if not, I should understand, because public commitments were difficult to cancel. My mother added that grief should not make people unreasonable. I remember standing in my kitchen, surrounded by baby toys and cold sunlight, realizing that the people who raised me had just made my husband's death sound like a scheduling conflict. They did come to the cemetery, but they arrived late. My mother wore cream instead of black and kept checking her phone. My father stood at the back with his hands folded, expressionless, as though he were attending the funeral of a distant acquaintance. Qasim's mother, Farzana, almost collapsed when the first shovel of earth hit the coffin. I rushed to hold her with Rayyan still in my arms. My mother did not move. Later, when people gathered at our small house, bringing food and prayers and soft words, my parents stayed less than 20 minutes. My mother complained that the house was crowded. My father said the atmosphere was too heavy for Rayyan and that I should not let tragedy define me. 3 days later, I discovered the truth of what they had been saying behind my back. My younger cousin accidentally sent me a voice message meant for someone else. In it, my mother's voice was sharp and clear. She said she could not believe I had expected everyone to rearrange their lives over a trivial event. She said Qasim had been a decent man, but not important enough for all that drama. My father's voice followed, cold and tired, saying maybe now, I would come to my senses and move back into the family circle where I belonged. I played that message once, then again, then a third time, not because I needed to hear it, but because some betrayals are so cruel. Your heart demands proof before it breaks. Rayan was sitting on the carpet, stacking blocks, smiling whenever the tower fell. I looked at him and thought of Kasim, who had once built him a crooked wooden train with his own hands after a 12-hour shift. That man had mattered. His life had mattered. His burial was not trivial. His love was not small. His absence was not an inconvenience. So I stopped calling my parents family. I did not announce it dramatically. I did not scream. I did not beg them to understand. I simply stopped answering. When my mother called, I watched the phone rings until it went silent. When my father sent a message saying I was being emotional, I deleted it. When relatives told me I should not disrespect my parents during a time of grief, I asked them where that respect had been when my husband was lowered into the ground. Slowly the noise faded. The house became quieter, but not empty. Kasim's presence lived in every corner. His jacket on the hallway hook, his mug with the chipped handle, the notebook where he had written, grocery lists beside little reminders to make me smile. Grief did not come like a storm. It came like daylight, unavoidable and everywhere. It came when Rayan pointed at the door at 6 in the evening, waiting for footsteps that would never return. It came when I found Kasim's hospital badge in the laundry basket. It came when I woke up reaching for a hand that was no longer there. Some mornings, I opened the curtains only because Rayan needed breakfast. Some afternoons, I sat on the kitchen floor and cried into a towel so my son would not be frightened. But slowly survival became a rhythm. I learned to pay bills alone. I learned to fix the leaking sink with a video tutorial and shaking hands. I learned to sleep on Kasim's side of the bed because the emptiness beside me felt less cruel that way. The first person who truly helped me was not related by blood. It was Kasim's old colleague, Noman Ver, a widowed father who had worked ambulance shifts with him. Noman came by one morning, carrying groceries and a small toy fire truck for Rayan. He did not pity me. He did not ask painful questions. He simply placed the bags on the counter and told me. Kasim used to talk about us during night shifts, as if we were the reason the sun came up. That broke me in a different way, not because it hurt, but because it reminded me I had been loved loudly by a quiet man. Noman began checking in every few days. Farzana came too, bringing warm meals and stories of Kasim as a boy. Together, they became the family my blood relatives had failed to be. On the 40th day after Kasim's death, we gathered in the garden behind my house. It was daytime, soft and golden, with sunlight caught in the leaves. Rayan ran between chairs while Farzana watched him with tears and laughter in the same breath. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something like peace, not happiness, not yet, but a small space inside me where breathing did not feel like betrayal. Then my parents appeared at the gate. My mother looked offended before she even spoke. My father looked impatient. They had heard from relatives that I had been avoiding them and decided enough time had passed for me to behave properly. My mother said grief had made me dramatic. My father said family disagreements should never be aired in public. They did not apologize for the message. They did not say Kasim's name. They looked past Farzana as if she were furniture and glanced at Rayan only when he ran toward me. Something inside me went still. For years, I had bent myself into smaller shapes to fit inside their approval. I had swallowed insults, excused coldness, and mistaken control for concern. But standing in that garden, with my husband's mother behind me and my son clutching my dress, I finally understood that family is not the people who demand a place in your life while dishonoring the people you love. Family is the people who show up when there is nothing to gain except the chance to hold you steady. I told them they could leave. My mother's face changed as if I had slapped her. My father warned me not to make a permanent decision during temporary pain, but my pain was not temporary, and neither was the cruelty they had shown. I told them Kasim was my husband, Rayyan's father, and the best man I had ever known. I told them anyone who could call his burial trivials had no right to stand in his garden, eat food from his home, or call his child family. My voice did not shake. That surprised me most. They left angry. I stayed whole. Months passed. The house changed. I packed Kasim's clothes slowly, not to erase him, but to stop turning memory into a museum of pain. I kept his jacket, his ring, and the wooden train he made for Rayyan. I started volunteering once a week at the Emergency Workers Support Center, helping families who had lost people in service. I told them what I wished someone had told me, that grief is not weakness, that love does not end just because a heartbeat does, and that sometimes healing begins the moment you stop begging the wrong people to care. One afternoon, nearly a year after the burial, Rayyan and I visited Kasim's grave. The day was bright again, painfully similar to the day we said goodbye. But this time, the sunlight did not feel cruel. It felt warm on my shoulders. Rayyan placed a small toy ambulance near the stone and said his father's name clearly for the first time. I cried, but I smiled too. Farzana held my hand. Noman stood a respectful distance away, watching over us like a quiet promise that life, even broken life, still had guardians. Near the end of that visit, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. For the first time in months, her message contained the words I had once begged to hear. She wrote that she was sorry. She wrote that she had been wrong. She wrote that pride had made her cruel. I stared at the screen for a long time. Forgiveness did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like a locked door I was no longer desperate to open. I did not hate her. I did not wish her pain. But I also did not confuse an apology with access. I replied only that Kasim had mattered, and that until she truly understood that, there was nothing more to say. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs strength, and subscribe to Single Dad Empire for more emotional stories about love, loss, family, and second chances. Special request, comment Kasim mattered. If you believe no one's grief should ever be called trivial. That evening, I carried Rayyan home under a sky full of gold. He fell asleep in the car, holding the little wooden train. And for the first time in a long time, I did not feel abandoned. I had lost my husband, and I had lost the illusion of the family I was born into. But I had found something stronger in the ruins. I found people who honored love. I found my own voice. I found the courage to protect my son from cold hearts, even when those hearts shared my blood. And as the daylight faded through our kitchen window, I hung Kasim's jacket back on the hook by the door, not as a symbol of waiting, but as a reminder. Some people leave this world and still fill it with warmth. Some people stay alive and bring nothing but emptiness. And sometimes, the bravest thing a broken heart can do is stop calling cruelty family